but great to see so many faces join us today for the session, and excited about this one in terms of being able to talk about the insights developments in terms of what they've developed out as the API. So really looking forward to the session. I think that's the lobby pretty much taken care of at the moment, Rebecca, isn't it? Yeah. So for everyone that's here, we are recording this obviously so we can share it with you after the event, and hope that's okay for everyone. But we'll kind of cut this up as well for socials between the speakers and myself, but you won't be in any of those bits. But we'll get that video out to everybody as part of the follow-up to the call. So I guess welcome everyone, and we'll get started and jump straight into it just now. Really excited to get this going today. As I say, insights and the development they've created around an API toolkit, I think is something that's really special. And as we start to look at creating employee experiences as part of our passion at Vidatec, it's certainly something that we're keen to evolve out solutions that blend this in. Full disclosure, for those who don't know me, and we've got a mixture of people on the call who know me well, some who don't, some who know Vidatec well, some who don't, some who know Insights well, and some who don't. So we've got a real blended group here, which is great. But I used to work for Insights and Insights Group, so I spent almost 12 years working with customers of Insights, creating solutions that would, improve high-performing teams, leadership development, culture change, etc. So I've seen the power that the kind of the physical elements of the profile that Insights Discovery is, and the classroom and coaching around it, seen the power that's had. So to be able to now think about how this can come into the digital world more effectively is something that I think is extremely exciting. And Vidatec were part of the Insights group up until 12 months ago, when we managed to complete an MBO and set a different course for Vidatec. So this is really something I'm passionate about as a business, and I think it's a fantastic opportunity for those in the world of employee experience to start thinking about how can we add that lens of personality to really to connect people and create those experiences that will kind of engage, excite, and inspire people in the workplace. I'm delighted today that it's not just myself. You're not going to hear from me that much, you'll be pleased to hear. But the kind of two key people that you will hear from is, first of all, joined as always by Nick, our CTO here. Nick's got a strong experience of creating digital solutions over the last 20 years, but a lot's been in that L&D and e-learning space. Is that fair, Nick?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think I'm excited to tell you about some of the opportunities that the API presents, and I think a bit of a lifting the lid on the capabilities of what we can do by mashing up data with AI capabilities. So looking forward to the session today.
Yeah, I've been talking for ages to people about that holy trinity of data, AI, and content, and how can we really get that personalization through. So that's exciting. And then, not that I'm not excited by Nick joining us, but I'm even more excited by Martin joining us from Insights, who's the Principal Innovation Manager there and leading the way on this whole API setup that the Insights have created. So, Martin, do you want to just quickly introduce yourself and say a little bit about your role at this stage?
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much, Ross. Pleasure to be here. Really excited about talking about the API. It's been my pet project now for a couple of years, the entire time that I've been here at Insights. Previously, I worked in edtech, and then prior to that, I was in finance. But coming here, I was particularly inspired by the idea of taking Insights beyond the workshop. I did my MBA a couple of years ago, and we did this preference test within it, and it changed the way I worked with my team dramatically. And I thought the idea about taking that beyond the way I was in a room with people to making it part of my working day was really exciting, hence the APIs. Very excited about this.
Great, thanks. And listen, this is not a podcast, right? This isn't just you guys listening to Nick, Martin, and myself debate it all. So please, if you've got questions, put them in the chat, put up the hand, and we'll bring you in to ask the questions physically. We want this to be an interactive session, and this is very much about learning. And hopefully for us, it's the first of a series around that whole employee experience and potentially the Insights API element as part of it. So stay tuned for that. For those that don't know that much about Vidatec, I just wanted to start with a little bit around our purpose. And we've had this purpose statement for a while now about this is what gets us out of bed in the morning, and certainly about the employee experience and thinking about how do we create that better work environment for people, and seeing the impact digital solutions can have there it plays into this perfectly. But we get excited about improving people's experience of life and making that positive impact in the world. But we know that's through technology. Technology is an enabler. It's not the whole answer. Employee experiences are created across a range of different factors that we'll talk about in a minute. So we see technology just the way that I used to see insights discovery, as an enabler to create better experiences, and bringing those two things together today. A little bit about our heritage. We've got a strong background in creating solutions that support people on a journey, essentially. So, we're known for doing things in the tourism and travel and leisure space traditionally, and also in the health and wellbeing space. So things like Couch to 5K that we created for Public Health England, about nudging people to form a positive habit, instill new behaviours, and create a kind of new environment for them. It's similar to what we've been doing about supporting people as a bit of a digital concierge in that travel and leisure space. So bringing that all together, we thought it made sense to start to look at employee experience, given Nick and I's backgrounds and the focus of the business and being part of the Insights group for such a long period of time. So we feel very passionate about that employee experience being a key driver for us at Vidatec and how we can create solutions for organisations. I shared this slide at a recent event we did where I picked it up from Web Summit, and the girl Alicia Grimes was doing a presentation. And a lot of the time we get lots of stuff that you come through about a customer experience, but probably not as much around the side about products and how do we get that people element right at the heart of experience and show that same passion. It just kind of struck a chord. And I think today, with what Martin's going to share around the Insights API part, it really enables us to get people right at the heart of that experience, which is great. David, I saw you had your hand up a second ago. I don't know if you had a question or not, or if you're all good. No, we'll crack on then. We've been creating solutions in this space for quite a while, as I'm saying. We've recently helped Insights launch an MS Teams app, so using MS Teams as that integration layer to drive experiences rather than having to kick out to a different platform. We've also got a couple of people from Heineken on the call today. We've built bots out for them to help people find information quicker and give a better learning experience, and the same for people like ACCA. And we've built our own platform called Engage4 to do these things. So I think we're bringing together a strong legacy element of providing these types of solutions. It's now how do we actually create that next tier and really bring in personality to drive greater engagement through digital products. As I said earlier, we know that there's a whole load of elements that come into employee experience, right? It's not just all about digital, but digital's got a key role to play in all these elements, whether it be health and well-being, whether it be about the onboarding piece or helping to drive culture. All those things come together. And we're just going to start to look today, maybe some use cases of how you could use that Insights API to accelerate experiences across some of these areas. But we know it's a bigger piece that brings the physical and the digital world together, and in terms of that employee experience. And then kind of the last little bit from me is, look, we've been around for over 15 years in this space, creating solutions. We really like to push the boundaries and explore the capabilities. Right now, AI is that piece, but we've been using integrations with APIs and other platforms for years. So we believe this is where our skill set comes in as a business, is about blending the available brilliant resources, the likes of which Martin's going to talk about today, but create that into something as an experience. So Martin's going to very much talk about the insights component element, and Nick's going to talk a lot more around what does that mean in terms of the experience that we can use to create from there, essentially. So with that, Martin, I guess I said there's some people on the call who know Insights, and there's some people who don't. Do you want to start by just giving us a little bit of information in terms of who Insights are and what they do?
Let's take it off mute first. Classic error. Yeah, thank you very much, Ross. So I've been here at Insights now for a couple of years, but Insights has been going for the best part of 30 years. Set up in Dundee by the Lothian family. And it's a tool that's based on the psychology of Carl Jung. Insights has a mission to create a world where people understand themselves and others and are inspired to make a positive difference in all they do. And they do this through their discovery model. Perhaps you could push forward a slide, Ross?
Sure, of course.
Thanks very much. So this is the basis of the Insights discovery model. It's a preference tool that's based on the psychology of Jung, as I've said. It helps people and teams understand their communication styles, their preferences, their working styles, and all of their key strengths and possible blind spots too. This color model is the simplest expression of the personality preference types that Jung defined. It helps us express and understand your self-awareness and the way in which you can collaborate together, enabling people to work more effectively. Now, instinctively, I'm sure you'll think of preferences and personality types by the colors alone, even if you just saw that somebody was a yellow leading a color energy type of person, you would know they'd be excitable and engaging. If they were earth green, they had like a nurturing aspect to them. Fiery red, they're going to want to get stuff done. And cool blue, they've got like an analytical bent. Those simplest possible expressions of what the four colors might mean immediately give understanding. And that's why Insights has become so popular. It's a very simple tool to express a very complex personal profile. If I could push you forward just one more slide, please.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say just at that part, my experience of working for 11, 12 years using this model is about the stickiness and how it helps people. So there'll be some people who will get really under the skin of the validity of Carl Jung's theories and the model, etc. But where we really see it is a practical application and that element coming through. But, you know, I think, was it 10 million profiles were celebrated last year, Martin, that Insights have delivered for people, yeah?
Yeah, best part of 10 million this year. I think we're pushing towards the 11 this. Yeah,
Brilliant.
exciting.
Great to hear. So I guess this is now about, again, we'll have a different mixture of people in the group, some very technically capable, some more from an L&D perspective and maybe not understand the tech world so much. So we're talking about API. What does an API mean, and where are Insights trying to focus for that, Martin?
Okay, well, the simplest possible expression, an API is an application programming interface. And all it means is moving data around. So whenever I talk to people about APIs for the very first time, I talk about APIs and I talk about them in terms of being a waiter for data. So imagine yourself being sat in a restaurant and you sit at your table and you pick up a menu. A waiter comes to you. That waiter asks you for your order. It goes to the kitchen. They get your order and they bring your food back. That's essentially what an API is. It moves data from one place to another depending on the conditions you give it. So I think, is there another slide that you could push forward to, Ross? Like we should have a picture of a little robot waiter.
I've got a question from Fraser at the moment. Just pause there and see if the question's related to the API stuff, Fraser. You're on mute, sorry, Fraser.
I'm on mute as well. There we go. It wasn't. It was my cat jumping across the keyboard.
Okay. Fair dues. Okay, I will move as swiftly on then.
Oh no, that other way. Sorry, I think we've missed the one with the back one more.
That's just that
one. Oh, it's missing. Oh, it's gone. Don't worry about it. Move forward, then it's fine. But what I would highlight is that people use APIs all day, every day. So outside of the waiter analogy, if you're checking the weather on your phone, that's using an API. It's calling the Met Office to find out what the weather conditions might be. If you're checking the tide times, I know that you guys up in Dundee live on the river, so it might be useful to understand that. That might be something there. You call that with an API. You check the news, you check the bus timetable. All this information is delivered by API, and they're a critical part of infrastructure. I had this concept that it could be a really sensible way for us to plug the concepts of Insights discovery model into new places, so people could call on it at a time of need. And I think transporting the data from the discovery profile and the Insights model into a workflow scenario, that's what I've been aiming for the last couple of years. And I've got some use cases that I can talk to you about that might help express that even more clearly. If we push forward one more slide then.
Yeah.
So Nick, you'll probably be familiar with this one as well, because I know you've been doing some work in this space. But
Indeed.
one of the most useful things I've found with the discovery profile is aligning it with other data sets. So people have been pulling the Insights API and understanding how people represent themselves and how they like to be understood, and applying that to other situations. They've been using two sets of data to understand a holistic scenario. And most often, the most holistic scenario people want to understand is teams. So they've been trying to understand if there's been a communication breakdown. Perhaps that communication breakdown is driven by the different energies represented by people's color types. Perhaps there's a way we could understand that better. If we had the data, we would know what it would be. We could plug that in and see. And this is just a representative example of a dashboard, but this is very much what people have been doing. They've been looking at the way people's color profiles and energies turn up in meetings. They've been looking at the way in which bonuses have been delivered across the businesses. It's a really interesting tool that people have been talking about. Have you got any questions on this front, actually, Ross or Nick? Is there anything you want to know about the way we've been looking at data?
I think the kind of key thing for me is round about, there was the old kind of analogy of you used to get your profile as part of a workshop or as part of a coaching session, and you maybe did that walking around the floor mat so you could see where everyone in the team was, and there was quite a kind of kinetic element there. But it was a one-time only piece, and that was almost kind of locked away. You've now got this data that can be live and present in kind of everybody's working day. How are the teams using it? What are the kind of use cases you're seeing for the teams to be able to use this? Is it about preparing for meetings? Is it about that one-to-one dialogue? How are you seeing it being used?
One that I find most appealing, just because I think it's the most novel, is people have started to use it to organize their seating plans. And like small as that might be, it's been hugely impactful in productivity. So I know, for example, in a workspace near me, they've been looking at this as a tool. And there have been days where I've been thinking about sorting out budgets. And I've been looking at the layout of my floor plan to decide whether or not I need a quiet space where people have perhaps focused or perhaps could support me in working in that way, and perhaps clustering around people that lead with a cool blue energy. It sounds small, but it's actually definitely made an impact for me. And I know that is something that we'll be thinking about in Terra Nova. Other places where I think it's been really interesting is people have been looking at historic bonus structures and seeing how people have been paid for their bonuses, and wondering if there's a disparity between lead color energy and bonus proclivity. So that's a really interesting contrast and comparison of two different data sets. It's really a case that the limits in this are limitless. If you can find another data set to compare to, holistic data analysis can be very interesting when you apply personality. Perhaps move on to another one and perhaps give you some other examples.
Sure.
Mentor and mentee matching has been really interesting. This has been an experiment that we've been running with some really big pharmaceutical companies. In a company that we've been working with, they like to promote from within, and they like to upskill within the company as it currently stands. And what they look to do is build mentor-mentee relationships across the business. And they might work cross-functionally as well. It might be finance to product. It might be, I don't know, manufacturing to finance. There's always a cross-collaboration element, and they move across functions. But getting those relationships to stick has proven really, really challenging. Previously, they've matched people on language, job role, future career aspirations, those kind of things. But what we've been experimenting with is whether or not matching people by their color preferences or by a disparity in their color preferences, opposites attract or not, whether or not relationships become more sticky and people spend more time collaborating and build a stronger mentor-mentee relationship. This is an experiment that we have in flight now, but we're already seeing some really interesting results about people being closely clustered and having more contact points, longer standing relationships, contacts outside of the workplace as well, an actual building relationship beyond the requirements of work, but building a collegiate friendship. And this has been very, very exciting. And I see this coming up more and more. So when we've been speaking to other companies around like how we could use the API with them and how they could apply personality, collaboration has been key. And I think this is a really exciting place to see that to talk through. Ross, any questions? Anything you want to know about this?
No, I mean, I think it's interesting, particularly when you talk about breaking down those geographical locations. You're talking about language, etc. there as well. And it's always been an issue for Western organizations moving into Asian countries and all that kind of stuff, how they get the leadership to come through. So it's a fascinating area around how getting the right mentor and mentee matching is great. But I think it probably leads us on to that next use case you're going to talk about as well, which I think a number of people on here will have experience of dealing with a bot in some way, shape, or form from an AI perspective. But you know, how do you personalize that from a coaching chat bot using insights language as well?
So the chatbots that we've already seen people actively using and starting to use as proof of concept work, they call upon the API to understand, perhaps in the relationship perhaps with me and Ross, for example. Ross might be my manager, I'm his direct report. Ross has been using the chatbot to understand my own preferences to best deliver effective feedback for me. So no doubt after this session, Ross will have some feedback for me, and he'll deliver it in the most effective style, thanks to the use of the API. And be able to understand, perhaps he could go easy on me with his nurturing green lead, despite his core red energy in this instance. It's not something that I underestimate in any manner, because it is really important. people take feedback very, very seriously. And the way in which people perceive that feedback as well is really important. So if you can deliver it in a way that is perhaps supportive and impactful, it could unlock a real key in changing behavior or improving behavior or consolidating behavior. I see this as a really powerful use case. There have been some really interesting works that people have started to do as well, where they've been playing with a chatbot and they've been playing with AI at the same time. They've been using the API to feed the chatbot information and the AI to contextualize it. So people have been looking at the interaction with the chatbot and adapting the way that the chatbot communicates depending upon their preferences. So for example, Ross leads with a fiery red energy. He wants his information short, sharp, and quick right there in front of him. Perhaps the chatbot will adapt and provide information in bullet points. I might look for a more nurturing experience and get a long run of text. I think that adaptation, depending on the user, that hyper-personalization based on personality, could be a really interesting area in the next few years as AI gets more and more important. Any questions on that one, Ross?
We've seen some poor examples out there, I think, of personalisation, which has been about the what. So whether it be on a commerce space or whether it be in terms of like the coaching stuff, it's the same content being fed to you, maybe just on your role or maybe on your location or whatever it might be, but it's not actually taking into account you as an individual. And you said earlier on, Martin, that insights have been extremely successful over the last 30 years. And what's been the key driver of that success? It's about helping one person interact with another person and make that connection stronger, essentially. You know, that's kind of the key thing. So it seems it makes sense that we're now thinking about this in terms of how can we do that digitally as we get more and more of the AI agents coming into supporting people in the workplace. How can we do that to understand you as an individual as well as what the content is that you need? And that overlaying of AI and stuff, I know something that Nick's going to speak to in terms of creating that ongoing support and, you know, creating that personal coach outside of the one-to-one relationship we might have, Martin, that you were kind of painting the example of. I think that's hugely exciting.
Absolutely agree. I think for me, like the last bit really, I suppose we should talk about in the next slide that I think I'll go through. If I want to move forward, can you move forward one, Ross?
No, that's the last one there. I think. Can you see that one? We see this as a partnership. Is that the one?
Yeah, that's the one. Perfect. There we go. Sorry, mine just took a second to catch up.
Okay.
And that's very much what I see. Like, we've been really lucky to spend time working with Ross and Nick. Tommy's come along and really helped us understand the way in which we can collaborate in this kind of space. I think Nick's had incredible experience of actually applying the API. He's built actual tools using the underlying infrastructure of it. And I think they can give some really solid examples of what you can do with it. I think I'll probably hand over to Nick there as it moves into the technical space, which is well outside my wheelhouse. But I'm very grateful for the time. If anyone's got any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
The other one I would kind of ask you just now, we'll come back to some at the end, I'm sure, is that how are you when you're getting customers coming and partners coming to you talking about the API? We've obviously done a lot of work recently about how you need to kind of redesign solutions based on AI coming in. So what's that like from an API perspective and starting to think about personality rather than just bolting something onto that existing solution? Are you helping them with that service design element as well?
Absolutely. I mean, that concept for me is it's just the potential of it's just unbelievable. I talk about it sometimes in terms of perhaps Jeff Bezos knows what you like, whereas if you apply this tool properly, you can find out what people are like. And I think that's a really powerful tool. And I think if you know what people are like, you can provide better experiences. And a brilliant experience leads to a brilliant product. And I think that's something that Vidatec have got real potential to do here.
Okay, brilliant. Again, to the wider group, if there's any questions at any point, please chuck them in the chat box or put up your hand, whatever. More than happy to get Martin and Nick answering any of those questions as we go. So I guess, Nick, in the nicest and most respectful way to Martin, the API is just providing data, yeah?
Absolutely.
In terms of it's providing data for you as an individual, but you've got to do something with that to then create an experience that means something and is impactful to individuals. So do you want to talk to us about what's in your mind when you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think looking at it's really the size of the opportunity. So the data is great. The API is incredibly powerful in terms of what it can give you. And I think, you know, I'll come from a technologist background, and I'll do a deep dive into, you know, where we can go with it, the technology. But the really powerful thing about it is really the creativity that gives you. It's, I think we've often heard it analogized to, you know, it's a fantastic paintbrush, but what you paint with it is up to you in terms of how you leverage that data. So we've been in a fortunate position at Vidatec to have been playing with the API. We've helped Insights with development of a Microsoft Teams application that lets you navigate color energies across your team and see the profiles of people and how what makes them tick effectively. And we've also had a recent hackathon, sort of playing, our development team playing with the API, looking at what we can do with it, looking at what we can achieve. I think, you know, Martin's already touched on a number of the use cases, but you can imagine the potential for something like this in terms of a mentoring and support tool, because you can immediately get access to an individual's individual psychology, tailoring your communication style, tailoring your feedback and your approach. You can visualize that data. It's something you can have immediately accessible. So that supports mentoring, it supports buddy systems, it supports people with development goals. I think also, and we've touched on it a little bit, but the capabilities of AI in this space. So we've had a number of experiments where we've taken a discovery profile, we even put mine into an AI chatbot, and we interrogated it, and the best ways to engage with Nick, the best ways to get time with me or present a requirement to me or a project or persuade me. And it's amazing the detail that you can get back from the Insights discovery profile. So you can imagine when an organization is using that at scale as a communications tool, there are massive potential use cases in terms of how you would manage that data, what you could do with it. A couple of the concepts we've got on screen at the moment are just a couple of examples here. So you can see probably in that first one on the top left, you can see some of the color energies, how people are leading across the team. You can start to see relationships in terms of team dynamics as well. So you imagine if you've got people, you're thinking of putting them together as a project team to work on something, you can see the distribution of those color energies across the team. That starts to become compelling because you can start to identify things like, what are the advantages of that team? You know, where are their strengths? But equally, where might they have blind spots that we either need to make them aware of, or we need to put a different set of individuals into the mix to make sure we've got a balanced approach in terms of what we're doing. You know, we could put, we joke about this with the development team, we could put them all in the room together and we might have 90% of them being cool, blue and analytical, but we need somebody fiery red in there to make sure the stuff's getting done. So I think that's an interesting use case you can play with the API in terms of getting that data out. Another example here of that, so you see the distributions across teams. You can imagine if you could leverage that data across an organization on an org chart, you would be able to see how people relate to each other, what's the best way to engage with somebody at scale. So that's the sort of information it would be really difficult to do if you were wading through individual profiles trying to understand the makeup of the company. With the API, you can visualize that data, and as Martin's called out, you can start to layer other data over the top. So good example is something like within Microsoft 365, you've got tools like Graph API. So from Graph API, we can get who your most common collaborators are across the business, what's in your to-do list. We can get your job title. So we can start to mash up data in terms of personality profiles, somebody's priorities, what their day looks like. And you can imagine the capabilities of building tools, support tools around that for an employee experience. It takes it to the next level because that data enables you to give something that's extremely personalized and specific for that individual's use case.
Yeah, and I think we've got a couple of other things here in terms of options. Like, I think it's that kind of world of possibilities that you're talking to there that's interesting, and not just putting the power in the hands of the organisation, but putting it in the hands of the individual about how they can do their own goal setting. But again, that agent, that bot would understand the personality as well as the content that you need and relevant and fleshing that through. So do you want to speak any more to any of these kind of examples here at all?
Yeah, I think for me, I mean, the stats I've got on screen sort of underline some of the opportunity here in terms of that engagement piece. So obviously we know I wouldn't want to quite call it a crisis, but we know employee engagement is a challenging piece at the moment in terms of the sheer scale and complexity of modern work, the number of platforms involved. And I think, just interesting. Some of the Gartner employee value proposition research is quite interesting. It just really shows how much personalization is, people are crying out for that in their experience. And I think a lot of HR platforms are trying to bring in these tools. They're trying to bring in that personalization lens. They're trying to bring in data about psychometric profiling, and we're trying to have the tool adapt. If they're using AI, they're thinking about how they can use prompt engineering to manage tone of voice so they can tailor communications effectively. You've got tools like Growly and Copilot that'll help you rewrite an email so that you can land it more effectively with that audience. So you can imagine having the right data from discovery in terms of the API. That profile enables you to do that much more effectively. So I think, yeah, lots of potential use cases.
I think you touched on something there. I'll jump ahead a couple of slides here in terms of, I guess, in everyday life, we're getting fed more and more around data and AI to try and provide personalised experiences for us, Nick. And I know, Tom, you get your hand up. I'll come to you in a second. But, if people have got that experience in their personal life, it's only right they expect it to be present in their kind of working environment. And if it's not matching those external experiences they've got, it leads to lower satisfaction with those digital solutions, essentially. Tommy, what's the question you've got? Sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of draw attention to David's point. Obviously, we've got a couple of recruiters that are on the webinar today, and his point about the use case about hiring managers and interviews, and it's a fantastic kind of set of use cases in terms of, imagine an organisation who are recruiting for a particular kind of role. So rather than worrying as much about the role description, maybe worry a bit about the personality type of the person that you want in that particular role, and then guys like Fraser and Chris, etc., having access to people's profiles via the API, so they could then match up the right personality profile before they even look at their CVs. Great opportunity and a great use case.
It is, and I was typing away to try and respond to David at that time, and just trying to navigate through the chat at the same time wasn't quite easy as moving the slides. But the feedback out there just now is actually that organisations, the bigger organisations anyway, are actually getting a lot of things right in terms of the onboarding experience. Is then once you're part of the business, it's fallen down a little bit, and you're not getting that same level of focus. And I think this is where creating new digital solutions with the Insights API is part of that, and understanding personality is key to keep that ongoing engagement. So yeah, it's interesting. Martin.
Hey Russ, yeah, I was just going to add to that really. I've seen people talking about this before, and in the actual onboarding process where people are coming into the company and understanding how the team works, that's an area where I've seen big value. I mean, and I found it when I actually joined Insights myself. My squads use user manuals where you have your profile and then some more personal information about yourself. And I found it really helped me integrate into a team once in a company. It's like it became part of the actual process. And again, I think it links back to the mentoring relationships, like finding a strong mentor as your or a co-buddy or someone like to help you in that onboarding process, a really useful tool.
Yeah, and there's a link between capability and preference, but it's not a capability assessment through going discovery. So therefore, it's not going to determine whether somebody's going to be good at that job or not, but it helped them on board and be more successful in integrating with the wider team as part of the onboarding experience for sure. Nick, if we jump ahead and give some generic kind of themes, because obviously the API is something we can use to help create the employee experience, but are there kind of tips you would want to give around what we should be thinking and considering in employee experience solutions overall?
Yeah, I think this slide sort of talks to some of the use cases, but if we jump ahead a little bit, when we look at this, we sort of say, what are the opportunities with the data? And we say it's very much about creating an ecosystem for employee experience, so that that people are going to touch data across different platforms, but how can we curate this? How can we curate their experience so it's a bit more effective? I think for me, we looked at sort of 8 key aspects of that. If we're building an ecosystem that's going to support employee experience, what do we want it to do? And more importantly, how can we leverage technology to make that more effective as well? I think for me, we want to consider reducing friction. There's massive platform and initiative fatigue within enterprise organizations right through to SMEs. Everyone's got millions of software tools. And I think rather than just adding one more into the mix, it's about saying with something like the API, how can you leverage that and actually put that already where your teams are? How can you build that into a software solution or something existing you have that enables you to get immediate access into that, and they're not jumping between different platforms. Again, how can your employee experience serve as a hub? So we talked about pulling data from multiple sources. The API advantage, we can mash up and layer data in different ways to get insights. We can build tools and capabilities. But again, doing that centrally in one place is the real advantage here. That API gives you that ability to be able to take that data and bring it into your platform and consume it. You're reducing context switching, you're making that information accessible and immediate rather than trawling through the detail. A platform like this as well, I think for me as well, we talked about that piece about the personalization. It should understand and adapt to a user's needs. So you'll probably see this creeping in with tools like Copilot, being contextually aware of who the individual is, what's in their to-do list, what things they've pinned in Outlook that day, and starting to have a bit of intelligence around it. And we see those APIs are available across lots of modern platforms. We can pull data in from a variety of different sources. So somebody might be using Basecamp, another agency might be using Jira, another business might be using Adobe. Those are all API-driven platforms, and enables us to pull in data and build an operating system that's unique for the needs of your business. But more importantly, it's sort of tailored to the individual specifics of what that individual needs to achieve that day, and build that support tool. Just summarize the last points. I think it's more on the technology side, but it's got to be scalable, it's got to be flexible, it's got to support remote and hybrid working. Really, any tool like that also needs to strengthen organizational culture. We particularly in our hybrid and remote scenario, it's very difficult to recreate those water cooler moments. And the way you can use personality to add those little touches, bring humor and bring insight into, somebody might be under pressure because they're, working individually on a project. What kind of aspect of their personality might enable you to engage and support them, particularly if you're a manager? How can you use that information to support your team more effectively? Also, the trust aspect. There are some pretty strong data governance controls around this API data, particularly on the Microsoft side, and certainly with the Insights platform enables the opt-in and opt-out mechanic. So it's very strong on data security, very strong on employee privacy. I think particularly with AI in the mix, that can be a tricky thing to navigate. So we already have those built-in controls that enable people to stay, whether they're opting in to sharing profile data or not. And I think that for me is the piece, that the last point here. The system needs to integrate seamlessly into what you're doing, but it needs to create trust ultimately. And when your employees get to see the benefit of having that data, that's where you start to get the trust. But having control over individual privacy is still something we always have to navigate from a technology standpoint.
I guess that's one of the advantages that, obviously we're passionate about the MS Teams app that Insights have launched, Nick, where you're bringing that into MS Teams. So all your security pieces and the trust is already there. It's not adding another system into another app or another platform that people got to get kicked out to. I think the next layer on that in terms of solutions you're talking about here is that central hub. How do we take all the content you've got in SharePoint? How do we take all the content you've got in your LMS? How do we take that understanding of the personality and understanding of the role profile, etc., and have that kind of ongoing, constant coach to support you in the goals that you're setting, as well as what have been set for the business? I think that's a brilliant example, bringing it into that MS Teams layer. So it can be a platform externally, it can be something there, but it really depends on your organization, your size, and the target audience of who you're trying to reach, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And one of the great points about the Insights API and the way that it's structured is that you don't have to take advantage of all the data. So there are some quick wins available with the data, which you can do things very quickly. And there's obviously a model that supports that. So some organizations will want to do a lot of heavy lifting and build tools that are incredibly powerful in terms of the level of depth of data. But actually, you can get results that are more straightforward quite quickly, and think of how you can have simple use cases that save a lot of time and sort of manual effort. This slide, I've got it up here, but I'm just going to say very quickly, probably one to screen grab. It's really just what I would say top tips. If you're looking to build this within your organization, how can you design a system like that? What are the sort of things that I'd recommend doing?
Yeah, I think that's great, and I kind of skipped over a little slide earlier because I wanted to come back to the point now more than when it was in the deck, is the fact that, Martin, you'll have people who are coming to you just now, hearing about the Insights API and wanting to know more. Some of them will be, like you talked about, the big pharma clients that are doing some of the Menti stuff, which is great. You'll have partners of your organization who are delivering insights-based solutions into customers who want to understand that. So a bit of the B2B to C. And then you'll have people who are creating, whether it be coaching bots or whether it be well-being products or whatever, who are just startups. I guess it's just trying to make that point that regardless of where you are in your journey, the size of the organization, if you're thinking of internal employees or an audience that you're trying to engage as a B2B model, there's options there essentially. It doesn't need to start big to be able to drive the right experiences, does it?
No, completely. I mean, we've got in terms of our sandbox, people playing in the space, we've got startups that are 4-man crews from Europe and from the US, all the way through to developer squads from giant farmers, as we've spoken about. But yeah, it's completely accessible, and I think the differences in the use cases allow that accessibility.
Perfect. So I guess there's a couple of other tips you've got here, Nick, about the employee experience and that whole ecosystem point you were making earlier.
Yeah, I think for me, this is what I would say the top tips, depending on the scale at which you want to do this. But I'd say, yeah, looking at what data do you already have in your organization and how could something like the Discovery API play a role in that? So what could you create to create insights? What could you join together in terms of overlapping data sets that will provide insights about? It might be, Martin alluded to the bonus thing, but it might be, who's progressed in terms of promotions, or have we not had promotions across different teams? Is there a color energy factor there? It might be looking at development opportunities. Is there a link between the courses that people are taking, in particular color energy on your learning platform? So there are all kinds of interesting ways that we could do that. Equally, based on personality or job role, we might recommend particular resources. So you could have the platform serve up SharePoint resources or learning management e-learning materials or PDFs based on a particular use case, either somebody having a development goal based on their color energies in a particular skill set or area, and then be able to tailor those recommendations to the individual. But yeah, for me, I think it's about exploring the data you already have, looking at how you can use personality as a lens to mash that together. What are the use cases then? How can you actually support that visually? And I think, identifying opportunities. Is it mentoring? Is it a buddy system? Is it fostering uptake of a particular service or tool within the business? Is it driving development? Is it driving people to focus on security? Whatever your organizational priorities are, there's probably a way to leverage the data to drive that and then measure the engagement as well. And I think for me, the big one is AI as an enabler to let people be able to interrogate large, complex data sets and get a humanistic response back. If you're using personality in particular and any psychometric or profile data, putting AI in front of that gives people a way to interrogate that, understand more about what makes them tick, or the other people they're engaging with across the organization, and can give them tips. So there's so much potential there.
I suppose we should say that other good psychometric profiles are available out there, but we've definitely got a preference from an insights perspective, and the language of colour we know that works so well. In terms of we've spoken a little bit, Nick, about platforms. We spoke a little bit MS Teams, and I think there's a lot of the existing platforms that are out there are now starting to integrate with Teams. But again, it feels like there's a potential for Teams to get a little bit noisy and a little bit busy if everybody's just got an integration into it. So is there anything you want to say about, maybe what to do in terms of employee experience, thinking about for those enterprise organizations that are using Teams as a potential platform, as well as what we would do through an app or a web-based approach?
Yeah, absolutely. So Teams is a really effective tool in terms of having an app solution, because you can apply that layer of data governance to everything going through it. Crucially, you target people where they're working. But I think it's also a balance. So there are constraints with what you could actually do within the tool visually in terms of the data sets you're presenting. So we have a very effective tool with Insights Discovery. It enables you to see what color energy is represented in the meeting. What's the dominant color energy? So I can see in advance of the meeting I'm going to, okay, this is very cool blue. In terms of the other people who are attending, they're going to be wanting to understand data, numbers, want to see what's behind this. I need to have information I'm presenting needs to be well prepared and in detail, whereas somebody's fiery red can be very much focused on outcomes. So I think it's a great tool. What I'd also say outside of that use case, though, you need to cater to the needs of distributed audiences as well. So we would look at mobile app capabilities as well, and very much gives you a lot more freedom in terms of what you would do with the data. So Teams, I'm sure most people have used it on the mobile, great for picking up a meeting, great for chatting, probably not so effective as a mobile experience. So look at the possibilities of being able to mash up that data across a web application or a mobile app that's much more of a focused experience and caters for that on the fly mobile workforce requirement. So I think very much understanding where your audience are and what's the best context for them to be able to get access to this. It probably won't be just one single solution. In an ideal world, we'd want to create that hub experience, but it could be that the way we access that hub is across different channels.
Great. So I'm going to stop sharing the slides at this moment in time and kind of kick off a little bit of a kind of question time, essentially. So I think first one for you, Martin, and again, this is where we want audience participation. Any questions that you've been thinking about as you've been listening in here would be great to hear. But you're very much at the first step of using the API here to bring out some data, Martin, about the individuals and that rolling up to team and organizational level. What do you see as the kind of future potential of an API in that space for insights and potential other psychometric organizations?
I think for me, like in the same way that perhaps like Nick has hinted towards, like it's that extra layer of understanding that it could represent for somebody in an experience. I think if you have a clear mirror to understand yourself and how you work with something, or perhaps a window into seeing the way that somebody else wants to operate, I think that additional layer in flow at the moment of the need is a really powerful option. I think for me, that's the most exciting space.
Cool. And Nick, obviously you've been creating employee solutions for years in the digital space. Some recently in terms of using AI in a stronger way and all the rest of it. What, if you could have had the access to the API a few years ago, what would you love to have done with it? Where's the solution you would love to have embedded this in to really help it kind of engage people better?
Yeah, I think it's the understanding of the individual. I think the team dynamics use case is very strong. The mentoring and managing use case is very strong. So typically, I think anybody in a managerial context, they go through a bit of a thought process in terms of for a meeting with one of their team. They're going to be thinking about what makes that individual tick. What are they looking to achieve? What are their career aspirations? How do they engage? What are their dynamics with the rest of the team? What's their communication style? And we all, as much as possible, try and flex and understand and relate to that individual the best way that we can. I think for me, it's that immediate access to information and quite detailed information, which is pretty powerful. So particularly in a mentoring capacity, or if you were, I think also the recruitment one is very powerful because you start to understand things like emotional intelligence as well as just purely somebody's focus on what are their skill sets and attributes. So I think for me, having a bit more of a detailed 360 view of what that person is like and what they're trying to achieve and where they fit within the organization, that's probably the main one for me.
I think both Jenny and who's had to leave us and John have put comments in that are kind of similar in terms of almost that kind of coach to help the blind spot bit and raise that awareness of stuff that you're not picking up naturally in the conversation. Or guess what? We're not picking up the signals from everybody all the time when we're talking. So how can that be used to capture that intent would be awesome. And I know, Nick, one of the areas that you're exploring and you're passionate about is how can we identify maybe the triggers of burnout earlier rather than burnout happening? So being able to pick up from tonality, being able to pick up from the email language that's been used, etc., that somebody's maybe using the more extreme cases of the colour energy in a bad day, that potentially just before they flip out. So Jim, you've got a question, you've got your hand up, and it's always good to hear from you, Jim. So ask away.
Just a quick one, Martin. you're trying a lot of these things. I see you're doing that, and you know, around sort of mentoring, etc. And you're experimenting. How do you set that up? What's the best way for you to experiment? You know, time taking, data. You know, how do you find out what's working, what's not working?
I'll buy Martin and Nick a few more seconds to answer that question and get their thinking caps on, because I think first and foremost, I think for me it comes very similar to the message that you were landing last year when we did the webinar about the bot that we built for you at Heineken, is about test and learn fast, right? In terms of get it out there, play with it. There's a mentality around it, I would say, that needs to be there, as well as the governance frameworks and the data frameworks that come through. So that's my little intro to Martin or Nick stepping in and answering that question properly.
So I could probably speak a little to that, Jim, in terms of from a digital perspective. I think certainly in the tools that we've built and where we've been working with the insights team, user feedback is a really critical component. So particularly we've used AI on a number of projects, and I think that feedback loop in terms of, you know, was this response helpful? That's a really good capture. I think similarly, you know, on any sort of technology tool like this, if we're giving somebody a personality-driven insight, is very much, did this help you achieve your goal? And I think this is also another area where AI is coming in, is that AI is very much focused, if you look at Copilot, very much focused on understanding intent. So if you go in, you're trying to achieve a certain thing, you might be working on a document, that they'll try and support you. If you're working in PowerPoint, they'll help you bring in slides from previous decks so you can reuse components. So a lot of these tools are now being built in. I think it's about attaching feedback loops and saying, was this helpful? We have to build a level of data so that we're closing the loop on that system, saying, actually, did that work for you? Was that useful? And if not, give us the recommendation, what would have helped? You know, what didn't you get from that? So I think it's a really interesting space, because particularly with the AI element, that being something that everybody is using is quite new. So I think we're going to start to get quite decent volumes of initial engagement in terms of feedback of whether people are or aren't happy. I think if we can leverage that, we can refine the tools really quickly.
Anything to add to that from an insight-specific perspective, Martin?
I mean, like, there's obviously the principles of good experimental design. So control group, test group, like quality A/B testing to understand where things come from. But for me, the bit that I always find most important when we're defining success in our experiments is knowing what that success looks like up front. So, for example, with the mentor-mentee relationships, we are looking to beat a target of the current relationships that are ongoing. So current relationships, those mentors averaged about 6 weeks. Can we beat 6 weeks by putting an interjection in this space? Do we beat that number? If so, by what number? Is it a valid number? Those kind of understandings about where we are now to where we want to get to, and then exactly what we apply to make that test is important to me. There's a point that somebody said something around in the chat about like measuring inflow, and where we do have a digital experience, we use triggers and experience like Hotjar to get feedback on the fly, say what people think of it in that moment. And Ross's point about making the smallest, lightest possible tool that we can iterate upon and make a better experiment on the back of, that's helped us have success.
And again, it depends. If we've got goals here about embedding, you know, cultural foundations of behaviours or values, we can measure that over a longer time. So there's different things that we would put into that, Jim. But I certainly think that key part about being playful, test and learn with the groups. And then that kind of comes to an interesting point that Sean's raised in the chat around potentially trust being an element. And I guess if we think about those almost 11 million people profiles, sorry, Martin, that we've got globally now, a huge number of those will be all on board and happy to share data and happy to trust, but there'll be some people who maybe don't, and maybe people newer coming into the system getting that digital experience might not get it instantly. Is there anything you guys have been talking about from a trust perspective, particularly about that personality lens?
Yeah, very much. I mean, there's obviously a lot of control and constraint under GDPR as to what can be actually done, regardless of how you play legitimate interests and how you use that data and anonymize it, etc., etc. But the most important factor we found is explaining what we want to do up front and then making it opt-in. So people can choose to engage in that space, choose to use their data, and choose how much of their data they represent to the world. I know that's something that you worked on quite extensively in the Teams app, Nick.
Yeah, very much. So I think you always have to design for the the unhappy path where somebody might not opt in and wouldn't want to have their data. And I think it's about being really clear about your use case and what data you would share. And again, giving granular controls. People might choose to share a limited subset of their profile. They might not choose to share everything. But it's about designing a system with that in mind so that you can cater for that. I think as these platforms gain critical mass, there's a fear of missing out, and people will tend to see the advantages that other people are getting and they'll want to leverage that themselves. But that's a journey in terms of that trust. It's not going to be overnight. So I think, very much bearing that in mind when you're thinking about what it looks and feels like is critical.
I guess the real trust point and the kind of adoption point is it making my life easier? Is it making my job easier in terms of instant access to data? It's feeding me content that resonates better with me because it's written in the style that I would want to receive it in, rather than just as a standard template coming out, and building that trust up over time. You'll always have the people who will be the early adopters and go with it and really make it work, the same as you've got with AI just now. And there'll be some people that might take a bit longer to get there, but ultimately it's about making their life easier to share information, connect with people, and receive data effectively. Would be the kind of key point.
I agree with you, Ross, but I think the other one element of that is you have to be open about what is actually going to happen to the data. So you have to sort of expel all that fear. Once you've got that out of the way, it's all what's in it for you. What's in it for you?
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that's fair. Yeah. And I know that there's a lot there in terms of that sign-up process that Martin was talking about, the opt-in, opt-out, that gives that control to people and that understanding at least. Okay. Any other questions from people? I'm conscious that we're reaching the top of the hour in time for maybe one more question if anybody's got anything holding there. No? Perfect. Obviously, delighted that everybody could join us today, and hopefully you found it informative in terms of the insights element and also just in generic terms around that employee experience. Martin, is there anything that you would want to have as a kind of final statement around the Insights API at all?
Well, it's a good question. I feel under the cosh now to come up with something really insightful. But no, for me, I think the most important bit about all the work we're doing is that I want to see brilliant experiments, because we're truly in a space of actual discovery. We don't know what this will mean beyond the moment. This could be something that would make a dramatic impact. We just look to find those brilliant use cases and find brilliant examples of what impact it makes. I want experiments that make impact. So yeah, that's what I would say. Impactful experiments, that's what I want to see.
Impactful experiments, and I guess one of the key things of that is, as part of the follow-up, we will be sending people a link to be able to go and get access to play about with the developers toolkit, essentially. So for those who are more technically savvy, you can go and fill your boots there. And for those who maybe need a bit more conversation, obviously the people like Martin, Nick, myself and Tommy are more than happy to have conversations and look at where those inspirational examples can come from of what you're thinking in terms of application. But again, just want to thank everyone for coming along today. It'll be the first of a series. You'll get the follow-up recording. There'll be other bits and pieces we'll send out just to keep this bit alive. We are really excited about the opportunity this presents to add personality into those digital experiences. Hope you are as well, and look forward to continuing the conversation in due course. Thanks, everyone.